The winds howled across the vast frozen wasteland of Antarctica, a relentless force that cut through the thickest of clothing and chilled even the most seasoned researchers to the bone. For days, the multinational team of scientists had worked tirelessly, excavating the area beneath the ice shelf where their instruments had detected a peculiar anomaly. What had first appeared as a minor geological curiosity had soon revealed itself to be something far more mysterious. They had uncovered something, an object, perfectly preserved in the ice, buried deep beneath layers that hadn't seen the light of day in millennia. No one on the team could quite believe what they were seeing. It was unlike anything they had ever encountered in their years of research. The excitement was palpable, the air thick with the kind of nervous energy that only came with the unknown. Using precision drills and heat lasers, the team meticulously worked to extract the object, their every move recorded for posterity. Each layer of ice they removed brought them closer to the discovery of a lifetime. The object seemed to pulse faintly beneath the ice, as though alive, though it had been entombed for millennia. Some among them thought it a trick of the light, but others were not so sure. After days of grueling work, the last barrier of ice was removed, and the object, alien in its composition, lay before them, shimmering with an unnatural gleam. It was cold to the touch, yet not in the way the surrounding ice was. It seemed to emit its own form of chill, a deeper cold, one that reached beyond the physical and into something more profound. The team's lead scientist, a grizzled veteran of countless expeditions, approached cautiously, his breath visible in the frigid air. He reached out to touch the object, and as his gloved fingers brushed its surface, a sudden surge of energy pulsed through the camp. Lights flickered, machinery whirred to life, and the object began to hum with a strange, low frequency that vibrated through their bones. Everyone stepped back, eyes wide with a mix of awe and terror. The lead scientist quickly pulled his hand away, stumbling backward as the hum grew louder. Something inside the object was stirring. The ice surrounding it began to melt at an alarming rate, steam hissing from the ground as the temperature around the object rose inexplicably. The team scrambled to figure out what was happening. Data screens lit up with incomprehensible readings. The object was alive, or at least something within it was. As the last of the ice melted away, a shape began to emerge. It was not what they had expected. Far from a simple artifact or alien technology, this was a creature, frozen dormant, but unmistakably alive. The shape inside was monstrous and beautiful, a mass of shifting, organic matter that seemed to defy the laws of biology as they understood them. It was unlike any life form they had ever encountered. Far beyond human comprehension, with tendrils of flesh and bone intertwined in ways that made their stomachs churn. Then it moved, a slow, deliberate shift, as though testing its limbs for the first time in eons. The camp fell silent. All eyes locked on the creature as it gradually came to life. A low growl emanated from deep within it, reverberating through the ice and into the very ground beneath them. Panic rippled through the team. Radios crackled to life as they attempted to call for help, but all communication was suddenly cut off. The air around them thickened, the temperature rising even as the winds outside continued their relentless assault on the camp. The creature was waking up, and it was not pleased. The lead scientist, frozen in place, felt a cold sweat drip down the back of his neck. This was beyond anything he had imagined. They had thought they were uncovering a relic of the past, something long dead and forgotten. But this was alive, and it was powerful. The creature's eyes, or what passed for them, glowed faintly in the dim light of the camp. It raised itself to its full height, towering over the humans who had freed it. The ground trembled beneath its weight, and with a sudden, terrible certainty, they realized they had unleashed something far beyond their control. One of the younger researchers made a run for it, his boots crunching in the snow as he sprinted toward the nearest snowcat. He never made it. With a sound like a crack of thunder, the creature lashed out, faster than anything that size should have been able to move. In an instant, the young man was gone, his body disappearing into the air as though he had never existed. There was no blood, no scream, just a cold, empty wind where he had stood. The rest of the team was paralyzed with fear. They were scientists, not soldiers. They had come to Antarctica seeking knowledge, not death. But now, death seemed all too certain. The creature turned its gaze upon them, studying them with a curiosity that sent shivers down their spines. The lead scientist tried to speak, to reason with the creature, but the words died in his throat. What could he possibly say to something like this? It was beyond them, beyond humanity, beyond Earth itself. This was something from another time, another world, a force of nature, or perhaps something worse. As the creature moved forward, the team instinctively backed away, their eyes wide with terror. It did not seem to walk so much as flow across the ground, its body shifting and reforming with every step. There was no escape. They were alone in the most remote place on Earth, with nowhere to call for help and nowhere to run. Suddenly, the ground beneath them shook violently, as though the very Earth was responding to the creature's presence. The ice cracked and splintered around the camp, massive fissures opening up beneath their feet. The entire landscape seemed to be coming apart at the seams, as if the creature's mere existence was disrupting the fragile balance of the environment. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, the shaking stopped. The creature paused, its attention diverted to something in the distance. For a moment, there was silence, an oppressive, suffocating silence that made every heartbeat feel like a drum in their chests. Without warning, the creature let out a deafening roar, a sound so loud and powerful that it seemed to shake the very fabric of reality. The air around it shimmered, distorted by the force of its cry, and the remaining members of the team fell to their knees, clutching their heads in agony. It was not just a sound. They could feel it inside their minds, a presence, alien and incomprehensible, probing their thoughts, their memories. It was communicating, but not in any way they could understand. One by one, the members of the team began to fall, their bodies convulsing as the creature's influence spread through their minds. It wasn't killing them, at least not yet. It was consuming them, absorbing their knowledge, their essence. They could feel themselves slipping away, piece by piece, as though they were being erased from existence. The lead scientist, fighting with every ounce of strength he had left, managed to rise to his feet. His vision blurred, his thoughts fragmented, but he had to try. He had to do something, anything, to stop this. Stumbling forward, he grabbed a nearby flare gun, aiming it at the creature with trembling hands. He fired. The flare shot through the air, a bright streak of red against the stark white of the ice. It struck the creature, but instead of recoiling in pain, it merely absorbed the light, its form rippling in response. The creature turned its gaze on him, and in that moment, he knew it was over. There was no stopping this. No weapon, no science. Nothing could stand against it. The creature was beyond them, beyond humanity. It had been dormant for millennia, waiting, watching, and now that it was awake, there was no force on Earth that could stand in its way. As the creature closed in, the lead scientist felt his mind begin to unravel. He could see flashes of other worlds, other times, as the creature reached into his consciousness, pulling him apart piece by piece. His last thought before everything went dark was that humanity had been lucky. Lucky that this creature had slept for as long as it had. Now, it was awake, and the world would never be the same again. As the lead scientist collapsed, the world around him dissolved into an endless void. His last moments of consciousness were filled with strange images. Worlds bathed in fire, civilizations reduced to ash, all wiped clean by a force beyond comprehension. And then, silence. Above the frozen wasteland, the sky remained unchanged, an endless expanse of white and blue, as if nothing had happened. The creature stood in the center of the camp, motionless, its massive, amorphous form barely distinguishable against the icy backdrop. To the outside world, nothing seemed amiss. The camp was still, the scientists gone, but there were no signs of a struggle. Just an eerie, unnatural quiet. In the distance, A satellite hummed in orbit, its instruments passively collecting data from the Antarctic region. The creature's presence had gone unnoticed by the rest of the world, for now. Far from Antarctica, in crowded cities and bustling towns, life continued as usual. People went about their daily routines, unaware that something ancient and malevolent had awakened in the most remote corner of the earth. Yet there were small signs, unusual patterns in the weather, subtle shifts in global temperatures that hinted at a deeper disturbance. But the world's attention was elsewhere. Several hours later, a helicopter approached the research station. It was a scheduled supply drop, bringing fresh provisions to the team. As the helicopter descended, its pilot noticed something strange. There were no signs of activity. No one was coming out to greet them, no radio contact from the ground. The camp looked abandoned. Landing carefully on the ice, the pilot and his crew disembarked, calling out to the team, their voices carried away by the wind. Still no response. The crew moved cautiously through the camp, the silence unsettling. The equipment was still running, the lights on, the computers humming softly in the background. But there was no sign of the scientists. Inside the central research tent, the pilot found the data logs. The last entry was a frantic series of notes about the anomaly they had been studying. It mentioned a discovery, a creature, frozen beneath the ice. But the final few lines were incomplete, as though whoever had written them had been interrupted. Where the hell did they go? One of the crew muttered, looking around nervously. The pilot shook his head, uneasy. There were no tracks, no signs of struggle. It was as if the team had simply vanished into thin air. As the crew searched the camp, one of them wandered near the excavation site. Something about the ice there seemed wrong. It was darker, almost as though it had been scorched, but the cold was still intense. The man knelt down, touching the ice gingerly, only to feel a strange pulse beneath his fingertips. He pulled back, startled, and stumbled to his feet. "What is it?" someone called. Before he could respond, the ice cracked beneath him, a thin fracture spreading outward with a sharp, echoing sound. He took a step back, eyes wide, as the ground beneath him gave way. With a deafening roar, the ice exploded upward, sending shards flying in all directions. The crew screamed, diving for cover, but it was too late. The creature surged from the depths, a mass of tendrils and shifting matter, its form indescribable and terrifying. It had grown, evolved, since its initial awakening. Now, it was free. In the chaos, the creature lashed out, its tendrils wrapping around the helicopter, tearing it apart as if it were made of paper. The pilot barely had time to react before he was lifted into the air, his body disintegrating in an instant. The others didn't fare any better. The camp was reduced to ruin in a matter of minutes, and the creature, now fully unleashed, turned its gaze toward the horizon. Across the world, strange occurrences began to escalate. Reports of mass hallucinations, people seeing visions of distant worlds and incomprehensible beings, filled the news. Climatologists were baffled by sudden and dramatic shifts in weather patterns, with temperatures rising and falling unpredictably. Seismic activity spiked, with earthquakes and volcanic eruptions becoming more frequent. Governments scrambled to make sense of the situation, but there was no clear cause. Some blamed climate change. Others speculated about solar flares or some unknown natural disaster. No one could have imagined the truth, that something ancient and otherworldly had been released from its frozen tomb, and its influence was spreading rapidly. In a high-security military bunker deep underground, a group of officials gathered around a conference table, staring at satellite images of Antarctica. The images showed the research station, or what was left of it. The camp had been obliterated, the ground around it scarred and blackened. The satellite had also picked up strange energy readings, unlike anything they had seen before. A man at the head of the table, his uniform adorned with stars and stripes, leaned forward, his face grim. "We need answers," he said, his voice low. "Whatever this is, it's not natural." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. "What do we know?" someone finally asked. "Not much," came the reply. The last communication from the station mentioned an anomaly, something they found beneath the ice. But after that, the speaker hesitated, glancing at the images. Nothing. The general stood, his eyes locked on the images. We need to contain this. If we don't, there may not be anything left to save, but containment was already impossible. The creature, now fully awakened, had set its sights beyond Antarctica. It moved across the frozen continent with terrifying speed, leaving destruction in its wake. And it was growing, feeding off the land, the air, the very fabric of the earth itself. It was no longer just a physical threat. It was something far worse. The visions intensified, spreading across the globe. People fell to their knees in the streets, clutching their heads as images of alien worlds and dying stars filled their minds. Governments tried to maintain order, but chaos was spreading faster than they could control. Entire cities were plunged into darkness as power grids failed, overwhelmed by the strange energy surging through the atmosphere. As the world spiraled toward collapse, one thing became clear. The creature was not just a threat to humanity. It was a force of nature, a harbinger of something much larger, something that could unravel the very fabric of existence itself. And it was only just beginning. As the creature advanced across Antarctica, it grew stronger with each passing moment. The environment around it twisted and warped, as if the laws of nature were being rewritten in its presence. What had once been an endless expanse of white was now a landscape of shifting, alien terrain. Ice contorted into jagged, unnatural forms, with patches of dark, pulsing matter spreading like a virus across the surface. In the military bunker, deep beneath the Earth's surface, the officials watched the unfolding disaster with a mixture of awe and dread. Satellite feeds showed the creature's path of destruction as it moved ever closer to the populated regions of South America. It was no longer a question of if the creature would reach the rest of the world. It was only a matter of when. "We need a response team ready within the hour," the general barked into the room. His face was set in grim determination, but even he knew that the odds were slim. Conventional weapons weren't going to stop this thing. Every scientist, every expert they had consulted, said the same thing. It defied any known method of attack. But they couldn't just stand by and do nothing. In the skies above, fighter jets soared over the southern tip of Chile, their engines roaring as they raced toward the advancing threat. Each pilot had been briefed on the situation, but none of them truly understood what they were up against. The orders were simple. Stop the creature at all costs. But deep down, they knew it was a suicide mission. As they approached the creature's location, they saw it. An incomprehensible mass of swirling matter, constantly shifting and reshaping itself. It was larger now, towering above the icy landscape like a living mountain. Its form was in constant flux, with tendrils of dark energy arcing from its body into the sky. The temperature in the cockpit dropped several degrees as they drew closer, frost forming on the edges of their instruments despite the heat generated by the jets. "Target in sight," the squadron leader said, his voice shaking despite his years of combat experience. He had seen war, but this was something else entirely. "Engage!" came the order from command. The jets unleashed their payloads, missiles, bombs, everything they had. The sky lit up with fire as explosions rocked the ground below. For a moment, it seemed as if the creature had been swallowed by the inferno. But when the smoke cleared, the creature was still there. It hadn't even flinched. The attacks hadn't left so much as a scratch. Instead, the creature seemed to be growing, feeding off the energy of the blasts. The pilots watched in horror as the tendrils of the creature reached out, faster than they could react. One by one, the jets were plucked from the sky, their pilots vanishing into the void as if they had never existed. There was no wreckage, no explosions, just silence. Within minutes, the entire squadron was gone. Back at the military bunker, the room had fallen deathly silent. The feed from the jets had cut off abruptly, leaving nothing but static on the screens. The general stood motionless, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "They're all gone," someone whispered, the words barely audible in the heavy silence. The general's jaw tightened. We're out of time. Across the globe, chaos was spreading. Major cities were grappling with mass hysteria, as millions of people began experiencing the same disturbing visions. Hospitals were overrun with patients suffering from seizures. Their eyes rolled back as they muttered in alien tongues. Governments were on the verge of collapse, unable to control the growing panic. In the midst of the chaos, a small team of scientists and researchers, some of the brightest minds in the world, gathered in a hidden laboratory far from prying eyes. They had been working in secret for weeks, ever since the first signs of the anomaly had been detected. They were not part of any government, but a coalition of independent thinkers and visionaries who had realized early on that humanity was facing an existential threat unlike anything it had ever known. Among them was a physicist who had spent his life studying quantum mechanics, a biologist who had made breakthroughs in understanding the origins of life, and a cryptographer who specialized in decoding ancient languages. They had come together for one reason: to understand the creature and somehow to find a way to stop it. It's not just a biological entity, the physicist said, pacing back and forth in the dimly lit room. It's something more. It's tapping into the fabric of space-time itself. The biologist nodded in agreement, her face pale from exhaustion. It's adapting to everything we throw at it because it's not bound by our physical laws. It's rewriting them. The cryptographer stared at a screen filled with incomprehensible symbols. I've been analyzing the signals it's been sending out. They're not random. There's a pattern, a language of sorts. A language? The physicist asked, stopping in his tracks. The cryptographer nodded slowly. I think it's trying to communicate, but it's not speaking to us. It's speaking to something else. Something out there. The room fell silent as the implications of her words sank in. What if it's not alone? The biologist whispered. The creature continued its relentless march toward civilization. In the towns and cities it passed, there was no resistance. Entire populations simply vanished, their minds absorbed into the creature's collective consciousness. It was learning, growing stronger with every life it consumed, every thought it devoured. And all the while, the strange visions continued to spread, infecting more and more people around the world. But there was a small glimmer of hope. The team of scientists in the hidden lab had made a breakthrough. They had managed to decipher part of the creature's language, enough to understand its purpose. The creature was not just some mindless force of destruction. It was a harbinger, a precursor to something far worse. It had been sent to prepare the way for a larger force, an interstellar civilization that existed beyond the edges of the known universe. It's a scout, the cryptographer said, her voice trembling as she read the decoded message. It's here to pave the way for the rest of them. The physicist shook his head in disbelief. An invasion? Not an invasion, the biologist corrected. A harvest. The team fell into a stunned silence. They had thought the creature was a threat, but now they realized it was only the beginning. In the hours that followed, the scientists worked furiously to come up with a plan. They knew they didn't have much time. The creature was growing stronger by the second, and once it had absorbed enough knowledge, it would signal the rest of its kind. There was only one chance to stop it. Using their combined expertise, they devised a plan to exploit the creature's connection to space-time. If they could destabilize the energy field surrounding it, essentially creating a feedback loop, they might be able to disrupt its ability to communicate with the rest of its species. It wouldn't destroy the creature, but it might be enough to sever the link and stop the invasion. But there was a catch. Someone would have to get close enough to the creature to activate the device. I'll do it, the physicist said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at his insides. I'll go, the others protested. But they knew there was no other option. Time was running out, and the fate of humanity rested on this one desperate gamble. As the physicist approached the creature, his hands shaking around the small device that could save the world, he saw the full scope of its power. It towered above him, a living nightmare of shifting matter and dark energy. He could feel its presence in his mind, probing, searching, trying to understand him. He hesitated for a moment, staring up at the creature, knowing that this might be the last thing he ever saw. Then, with a deep breath, he activated the device. For a split second, nothing happened. The world held its breath. And then, with a blinding flash of light, the creature let out a deafening roar. Its form rippling and distorting as the feedback loop tore through its energy field. The physicist was thrown to the ground, his body racked with pain, but he forced himself to watch. The creature was being torn apart, its connection to whatever lay beyond severed. Its body thrashed violently, and for a brief moment, it seemed as though it might implode. But then, slowly, it began to retreat. It wasn't gone, not entirely, but it was weakened, its influence waning. The signal had been cut off. The invasion had been stopped. For now, as the physicist lay on the frozen ground, staring up at the dark sky, he knew that humanity had bought itself time. But the threat was far from over. The creature would recover, and when it did, it would try again. And next time, it might not come alone. Humanity had won a battle, but the war was only just beginning.